Beautiful innovation, the joy of the whole world, the joy of the whole world, is to see you and kings and queens who live with the child they will know the anger of Yahweh who saves them. He is a refuge for the sea of so when we call for salvation, from where will it come? A light will go forth from Mount Sinai, and the King will come to the city of Elohim. The city of Elohim, the city of she's like a bride in a white dress. Adorn her with jewels. She's like a bride in a white dress. Adorn her with jewels. When they come for your jewels. Great is Yahweh and greatly to be praised in the city that bears his name. City of Elohim. When we turn back to Jerusalem, we're crying to see your face again. When you pour out on your people in Zion. When we turn back to day there'll be no more disgrace and treachery that led us far away into the strange and distant land. But in our hearts, we long to go home. When we turn back to Jerusalem, we're crying to see your face again. When you pour out on your people Israel, that's at the end of the exile of Israel. In your hand, that will be the day we'll sing as one nation. We'll dwell in peace on land you gave to Jacob. You'll be our God, and we'll be your people when we turn back to Jerusalem. We're crying to see your face again. When you pour out on your people Israel, when you have mercy on the whole house of Israel, that's at the end of the exile of Israel.
Well, shalom, everyone. We have, as always, we have eaten. So let's take a look at Devarim 8, verse 10, which says, "So you'll eat and be satisfied, and you will bless Adonai your God for the good land he has given you." So let's do that. Abba, we have eaten, and we're satisfied. We thank you for the land. In Yeshua's name, we thank you. Amen. So this is the Midrash on our the Torah portion that we read today, Tavo. Tavo, which translates to when you enter or when you go in. And so we have a questionnaire here before you, A, B, C, or D. According to the traditional counting, how many mitzvot or commandments of the 613 were in this particular Torah portion? Is it A, 6, B, 7, C, 11, or D, 17? I hear a lot of C's. Okay, let's do it in an orderly manner. Who guesses A? Who guesses B? One B, okay. Who guesses C? One semi-hand over there, I saw. Who guesses D? Who's afraid to vote? Who's afraid to be afraid to vote? Say you're afraid to vote. Okay, well, here we go, folks. Number 7 is out. What's next is D, 17 is out. So it's between A6 or C11. And ta-da! It's 6. When in doubt, guess A. A recount? Never had a recount. Okay. I will never concede. Okay, well, let's take a look at the 6 that are in this portion. The first one comes from chapter 26, verses 3 to 12, to make a declaration presenting the first fruits. And the application listed is from the FFOZ's discussion of the mitzvot for this Torah portion. The applicability is Israelites living in the land with a functioning temple or tabernacle and a functioning priesthood. So does that apply? Is that able to be done right now? At least not in line with what the Torah says, I think. You really have to have a functioning priesthood and able to do this. The second is to make a declaration over the tithes. Same applicability. Do not eat the maaser sheni, or the second tithe, while in a state of mourning. But again, this requires a functioning tabernacle and functioning priesthood, or temple and priesthood. Do not eat the maaser sheni, second tithe, while in an unclean status. Again, the same applicability. Do not give the maaser sheni, the second tithe redemption money, for the dead. Again, that has the same applicability according to what FFOZ says. I think that's accurate in terms of applicability. Seems like the clicker has stopped clicking here on the slides here. Can you advance the slide on the computer, JD? The clicker doesn't seem to be working here. Oh, the computer's thinking? Okay. I'm just confused with count because of this. What is the Maaser Sheni is the second tithe, so you don't give it for the dead in that sense. Okay. So the next one is to walk in the ways of Elohim, which is from 26:17 and 28:9. It's not on the screen, but I'm telling you what it is. It's really the only one that is applicable for today in the sense of what FFOZ shows, which is, again, if you look in the Bible, it's both 26:17 and 28:9, which is the applicability is for Israelites and God-fearing believers in every time and every place, and the command is to walk in the ways of Elohim. So that definitely would track in terms of what the mitzvah is. And that kind of is all-encompassing, isn't it? To walk in the ways of Elohim. So that could be broadly defined, I suppose. What would be the applicability? How would you, in today's time, how would you walk in the ways of Elohim? How do you walk in the ways of Elohim today? One way, clearly, is to know what the mitzvot are and to do what they say to the best of your ability. The best you can without a temple and priesthood. Now, some of the, as we've said, as we've seen, this one on the slide on the screen anyway, to not give them aser sheni, redemption money for the dead, is something that really doesn't apply because you can't if you go back a slide, like we can't right now, it's kind of locked up, but you can't even bring the aser sheni, so you can't bring that second tithe because there is no one to bring it to. So clearly some things you can't really do in today's time without a functioning tabernacle or temple and a functioning priesthood. But command to walk in the ways of Elohim, certainly you can do that to the best of your ability in all places and times. Jim, you had a comment?
Is one of the ways that we can go as far as we can with all the temple priesthood is it says to move the Levites and the really still do that. Levites all over.
Question is, could you still include the Levite in your giving? How would you do that? What would be the methodology for doing that?
There are Levites, they're just not organized. As Christians, we're already called to be a priesthood. We're called to be a holy priesthood.
But not Levite. The scripture says to give to the Levite, to never forget the Levite. Right. During the exile in Babylon, there is these same mitzvot could not be done as well. What's that? Well, they definitely didn't. They couldn't do it. I mean, there's not really much writing on what they did or didn't do.
Well, they're doing it in spirit. Like you may not be able to find a Levite, but you can give tithe to. It also says the widow and the fatherless in that. So doing the best you can for those who find that need. Is that? I mean, can you take that away?
Yeah, I mean that's true. The widow and the fatherless or the orphan are in there as well. Well, because at the time there's a Levite presence in all the across the. Mm-hmm.
To me, that would be, we're taking it as far as we can go without a temple. We can still do that. Just ask.
Yeah, I don't know. I think that the question might come up with could you find an individual Levite and give to him? The point of giving the Levites though was because they wouldn't have another job. That would be their only way of providing for their families is to be doing the job of the Levites. So it could possibly, would it be applicable to say, to give to those performing the function of Levites, even though they aren't Levites, in the sense of
That's what I was thinking. I don't think so. But I don't see where it says that.
the
It does say Levite, but anybody from it's to keep them while they minister. I agree that that's not, you're not to give them the holy portion. They can't touch that, just like you can't touch it. I'm not a Levite. But they are worthy of our support. Right. And that's what the tenth is, or that was part of verse 12. And he's talking about the tenth, not the holy portion. The holy portion came first, and then it says after you separate the tenth of your flock, you separate out the tenth, give it to the Levite, the four, and one for the Lord. And that's what I'm talking about. Right. Right. And that fits with the community ministry. Who's doing that? We're supposed to support the ministry. Yeah, but that's not what the holy portion. Right, so that's the tenth wasn't the holy portion. First fruits and tenth, that's it.
Okay, I think you mean that it's there's generosity, and then there's two. There's one for everyone need, and then there's one specific. Yeah.
There's alms, there's givings, there's, you can support with the givings, your tithes goes to a specific thing. The other two is at your discretion.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, the verse one is down to verse 11, it's talking about the first. And at the end of that, it says, if you're going on to the, in your household, or and that's about the holy portion. That is that portion that you actually brought before God and gave and made the proclamation. Yeah, that's in the holy one. Right. In fact, you have the holy one. Anyway, the other two because you have to present it before the reciting Torah. The other 2 years goes to the poor and orphan and widow and their gates. Well, that's the first fruits. The first fruits is separate from the tenth, the tithe. Because it doesn't talk about the tenth until you get to verse 12. It's separate. And that's what it says after you've separated it from the crop. You give the 30 days. That's separate from the first fruits. If you're separating a tenth and giving it to the Levite, the foreign, and the orphan, and the widow, so they can have enough food to satisfy, then we'll stay with it. There's you're saying for the Levite, you're in the house, and set aside the Levite, the orphan, and the widow. And I can add that with that tenth, which isn't the holy portion, but it is set aside for God to feed ministers. It calls it says Levites, but in that day and age, all there were in Israel, they were ministers. They were Levites. That was it. All of the ministry from Cohen on down, the whole temple ministry. Right. Everything, all ministry. We do not have temple. But we have ministry. We're supposed to be on the most. We're supposed to be on I was more heavy about calling this anybody so you might have someone serve under Levite is literally someone who tried to live like that. That's it. What their job was to All right, back to it.
Okay. I don't think that I've answered your question, Jim, but I'm not sure your question is really answerable. I don't know if Ben has answered your question or what has come to. It's a Midrash, right? It's supposed to be discussing stuff. Yeah, it is. So the next one, as I mentioned, is walking the ways of Elohim. And that's the only one that FFOZ holds to be applicable in today's time and place, and applicable to basically to Israelites and all believers. So what's up next is the FFOZ video on the on the portion, the Parsha points by 119 Ministries. I just wanted to point out, I mean, just as an aside, that we do watch a lot of 119 videos here, particularly on the Parsha points. We do not necessarily agree with every teaching that they've ever put out. Just as an aside, and there's been one recently came out on fasting on Yom Kippur that I've looked at, and I don't necessarily agree with a lot of the points in it. So if you have questions about that video or what's in it, from my perspective, feel free to ask me after the service.
Welcome to another episode of Parashah Points, short thoughts from the weekly Torah portion. This week's Parashah point comes from Ki Tavo, which is Hebrew for when you enter, and it goes from Deuteronomy 26:1 to Deuteronomy 29:8. This Torah portion speaks of the first fruits ritual, tithes, and list of blessings for obedience and curses for disobedience. There's a lot we can talk about in this Torah portion. Today, we're going to talk about the command to rejoice. Deuteronomy 26:11. And you shall rejoice in all the good that Yahweh your God has given to you and to your house, you and the Levite and the sojourner who is among you. This command is in the context of giving the first fruits offering from the land. God commands us to rejoice in all the good that he gives us. Being grateful to God for the good that he gives us is not an option, but a command. We recognize that ultimately God is the source of the harvest. He is the one who provides our needs. We are commanded to rejoice in response to his provision. But what if we don't feel like rejoicing? The answer is simple. Rejoice anyway. Don't be led by your emotions. Instead, let your actions lead your emotions. Think of what you have as a gift from God, because it is. Now say these words. Thank you, Lord, for blessing me with all that I have. Even if you don't feel grateful, express words of gratitude toward God anyway. It's true that words of gratitude don't always come naturally, but that doesn't change the fact that God is worthy of our thanks in all circumstances. Also, when you start acting grateful for all the good that God has given you, in many cases, you'll find that you start feeling grateful as you do it. As John Piper says, your aim in loosing your tongue with words of gratitude is that God would be merciful and fill your words with the emotion of true gratitude. Thank you for joining us for another Parashah Point. We pray that you've been blessed by this teaching, and remember, continue to test everything. Shalom.
I like that statement of even when you don't feel like rejoicing, answer, rejoice anyway. Well, he pointed to the passage that says that we are to always, that Elohim is worthy for our praise in all circumstances, for sure. So JD kind of brought up this as part of the youth challenge. My father was a fugitive Aramaean or a wandering Aramaean, not Armenian. And there's a couple of translations here. Now, we see from ISR, the NJPS, new JPS, Jewish Publication Society version, my father was a fugitive Aramaean. And those are very literal translations of the text. ArtScroll reads a bit differently, saying an Aramean tried to destroy my forefather. And so, of whom is that speaking? Well, Laban. The other translations, a Syrian ready to perish was my father. So a Syrian and Aramaean is the same. My father was a wandering Aramaean, and my ancestor was a nomad from Aram. But how is it come about that ArtScroll has a kind of a different version? Well, it comes from earlier. It comes from both Rashi as well as the Targums, which preceded him, of course. Targum Onkelos, Aramaic translation with commentary. Laban the Aramean sought to destroy my forefather, and Jonathan, our father Yaakov, went down into Aram Nahariya, or Mesopotamia, at the beginning, and Laban sought to destroy him. So that's where that idea comes from. Translation with commentary, and ultimately their explanation is quoting from Rashi following Sifri, which is basically a midrash on Bamidbar and Devarim. In the plain, and they continue in ArtScroll's commentary. In the plain sense, this term is rendered: my forefather, i.e., Jacob, was a lost or homeless or penniless Aramean. In other words, the same translation as you see in all the other versions, meaning that Jacob lived in Aram for 20 years of his life. And that comes from Ibn Ezra, a medieval commentator, early medieval commentator. Okay, so I got this a little bit in hard to see on there. The year of tithing, reading it from the ISR text. So what is it? We've been talking about tithing a bit in the kind of the Midrash. At the bottom of this, it's given it to the Levite, to the stranger, to the fatherless, and to the widow. So those are the four categories of giving or tithing in the year of tithing, as it says. And I apologize for the bad color on the screen there. That's kind of the point of discussion. It's not just to the Levite, but also to the stranger, to the fatherless, and to the widow. How do you give it to any of those categories? Or do you rely on others to give for you? How do you think it was done in ancient times? Okay. Could have been to open up your storehouses, so to speak. Yeah.
Actually, other parts of the Bible says, and bring him into the store.
Mm-hmm.
which I do believe was a portion of the temple, which was set aside specifically to hold those tithes to feed the community when they were here.
So if you brought yours to the central storehouse, then the Levitical priesthood could apply that out to the other categories: the fatherless, the widow, and the stranger. Yes.
And in the New Testament, that's what the deacons, that's what they were.
The deacons were servant. They were the ones that were
To do was to hand out the food so the ministers could
do the ministry and let the others do the food ministry, so to speak. Yeah. Sorry, I have another slide that's the same way. I'm going to have to probably go to see what happened here. Hold on just a second. So I think when we restarted it, some of the slides that I had hidden status didn't stay hidden. So I wasn't going to discuss all this stuff this time. So that's a big old basket. So blessed is your basket and your kneading bowl. That's a good basket of blessing there. So the Torah talks about being established or being raised up, being established you as a set apart people. It's sworn to you if you guard the commands of Yahweh, your Elohim, and walk in his ways, and all peoples of the earth shall see that the name of Yahweh is called upon you, and they shall be afraid of you. So there's both a blessing and a fear factor involved if you actually were to follow commands, or Israel were to follow those commands. You are being established as a set apart people, and one to not be messed with, not because of the might of the people, but because of the might of their Elohim. So to comment on this, establish is kum, or to raise up. You might remember that it's the same, and it may well be part of the reason for the chosen Haftorah begins with kum ori, arise, shine. This is the same idea. The name of Yahweh is called upon you. The people walks in the ways of Yahweh and has the name or authority of Yahweh over them to protect them. The point of being set apart as separate people is to magnify the name in the earth. So not only are there blessings for the blessing your basket, so to speak, there's also some curses in this Torah portion. What are the curses for? If you check out verse 15, what does it say? It shall be if you do not obey the voice of Yahweh your Elohim to guard to do all his commands and his laws, hukim, which I command you today, that all these curses shall come upon you and overtake you. So there is some. It's not just blessings for obedience and nothing for disobedience, but also a negative outcome for disobedience. Positive. There's not a middle outcome. There's a positive outcome for obedience and a negative outcome for disobedience. Now, there's a bunch of words for curse used in the Torah. Allah, kalala, arar, and drar. The word in 28:15 is the word kalala, but in verse 16 is arar. Excuse me. There are other words that you see in Scripture that are similar. Harem, a cursed thing, and lahat, enchantments. They both have Aramaic cognates in the Ketuvim Netzarim. You may, as an aside, there's a well-known word. Just a second. There's a well-known cognate, an Arabic cognate for harem, that is kind of well known. Does anybody know what the cognate for harem in Arabic is. It's known by a group that has it as their part of their charter. Boko Haram. Does that name come out? Who's Boko Haram? They're a West African ally of ISIS. Boko Haram translates to education is forbidden. The word haram is the word forbidden, which is the Arabic cognate for harem, a cursed thing. Ben, you had a question.
Yeah, I was wondering why these curses and blessings are considered mitzvot, considering it specifically telling us that there's a penalty for each of these.
I think the question is why aren't these specific blessings as mitzvot, as positive mitzvot, and the curses for negative mitzvot why aren't the curses negative mitzvot? Well, I think when you look at them, they're already you'll find those listed elsewhere as things to do or not do. So you'll find those in the Torah, and it's just not counted from these particular passages. Although it would have made sense to have counted them from here. I agree.
That confused me for a long time.
What's that?
Well, I would always guess the most that it could be a lot of rules, and then with these men, like, I finally realized, they get repeated a lot.
There are a number of ones that do have repetition. Yeah. So there are, of course, some misunderstandings of that phrase, the curse of the Torah, or the curse of the law. Some argue that the Ketuvim that's in the New Testament, the Brit Hadashah, the Apostolic Scriptures, makes these curses irrelevant, citing passages such as Galatians 3:10, which reads from New Kings, "For as many as are of the works of the law are under the curse. For it is written, curses everyone who does not continue in all things which are written in the book of the law to do them." Well, let's take a look at that. Continuing reading, Christ has redeemed us from the curse of the law, having become a curse for us, is written, curse everyone who hangs on a tree. However, there is a big however there, that when Paul wrote that, he was writing most likely prior to the siege of Jerusalem, and the Roman coin depicting Vespasian, shown on the screen, front side and back side. The front side shows Vespasian, the back side is a Roman soldier standing near a desolate Jewish woman after, of course, the destruction of Jerusalem and the temple. So what does that mean? It means for the curse for disobedience was still in effect. It didn't end with the death of Yeshua. The curse for disobedience still stands because you can see, there's still disobedience going on. Was Israel obedient to following Yeshua? No. And so that was part of the disobedience that came about. Sad, but true. So some classic misinterpretations of these passages, including James 2:10, whoever keeps the whole law and yet stumbles in one point, he has become guilty of all. Here's a classic misinterpretation. Since all have sinned and everyone falls under the curse of the Torah if they attempt to keep the Torah. I'd stop there and bring up JD's things, what doesn't fit or what's not quite right about that. Since everyone sins, the Torah only brings curses upon a person. One should therefore abandon any ideas about keeping the commandments and rely only upon faith. One who tries to keep the Torah is not relying on faith alone and will perish or go to hell for trying to keep the commandments. This was listed in First Church of Zion's discussion. They're showing a classic misinterpretation. So what do you see wrong with that interpretation? Just about everything?
Well, the first line, since all have sinned, everyone falls under the curse of Torah.
But then the last phrase there, if they attempt to keep the Torah, that doesn't make any sense, right? Because the curse of the Torah comes from disobeying it, not from obeying it or attempting to obey it. That the Torah itself is the curse. Yeah. Yeah. Well, how would you respond to someone who said that to you? Don't say tell Wes to punch him. Right. Where is he quoting it from? Right. Mm-hmm. Hmm. The simple thing I think is the Torah contains blessings for obedience and curses for disobedience. And the curses for disobedience are what the curse of the Torah is being spoken about. The curses are not for obeying the Torah. That'd be ridiculous, right? Why would you be cursed for keeping what? I mean, you can go back one level. Who gave the Torah? Was it Moses or was it God himself? Ben?
Two ways to combat that. One is the words of Jesus himself. Two different places when he said, I came not to do away with the Torah, but to fulfill it, because not one jot or tittle will change until basically will be gone.
Right.
And then he also said, be perfect as I am perfect. And the only way we do that is do what the Torah said. The other part of it is the curse that it refers to is the curse that if you sin, you die. And because of Yeshua's work on the cross and his resurrection, that curse is broken because now we have mercy and grace. Mercy to take away their penalty, and grace so that we have time to get it right. We've always had those things. Yeah, but it wasn't permanent. Yes, it was. It was only yearly. We've always had grace and mercy even before Yeshua. We've always had grace and mercy even before Yeshua. Yes, it was had to be renewed yearly.
And Jesus, not the keys of hell, and gave it to us.
The what?
The keys of hell.
Eddie?
Maybe the question is, I think, are the curses in the Torah, the curses given because we on this covenant, or are those both of the privileges?
Well, that's a good question, because when you after 28, chapter 28 comes 29, after 29 comes 30, which talks about basically the people returning to walk in his ways. The first 6 verses of chapter 30 do discuss that in detail. So yes, it is, you can do teshuvah, you can repent and start again.
And truly, God forgives.
So examining the logic, Moshe wrote 27 chapters of admonitions to keep the commandments, and then at the end of the 27th chapter pronounced that if you break a single commandment, it is as if you've broken them all. Therefore, there is no point in trying to keep the commandments, since doing so places you under a curse. Is this either scriptural or logical? Neither, right? So, okay, so it's good to know what the common teaching about salvation was at the time of Yeshua. This comes from Mishnah, Sanhedrin, which reads, "All Israel have a portion in the world to come, for it is written, thy people are all righteous. They shall inherit the land forever. The branch of my planting, the work of my hands, that I may be glorified, but the following have no portion therein. He who maintains that resurrection is not a biblical doctrine. The Torah was not divinely revealed, and an epikuros, which is a follower of the Greek philosopher Epicurus, whose basic line is "pleasure is the greatest good." So Epikuros, as a figurative term, means heretic. Rabbi Akiva added one who reads uncanonical books. So that applies to you guys.
I'm wondering if that's where they got the idea that those Jews that become Christians are no longer part of the Jewish community, even though they let Buddhists and are Christians and everything else, so that means
Yeah.
part of the community.
He's become, as the Talmud says, he's become as a leper, and he's called the leper Messiah in the Talmud. Mishnah continues, also one who whispers a charm over a wound and says, I will bring none of these diseases upon thee, which I brought upon the Egyptians, for I am Yah, or Hai, the name, I guess, Hai, in that sense, or it's an abbreviation for Yetevave, that healeth thee. Abba Saul says, also one who pronounces the divine name as it is spelled. Of course, that would apply to Abraham, so probably a bit in error. But anyway, that's the idea from the time. So kind of to sum up here, the curse of the Torah is not for trying to keep the commandments, but the curse of the Torah is for not keeping the commandments. Being an Israelite or being Jewish alone by birth or conversion is not enough to keep you from the curse of the Torah, since the curses in this Torah portion were presented to the children of Israel. So if you go back to that thing, all Israel has faith in the world to come, there's also the caveats that they made that there are some Israelites who don't. But even more than that, the Torah portion says is given to Israel, as pointing out that these curses apply to you if you don't obey what the Torah says. So being Jewish or being an Israelite is not enough to keep you from the curse of the Torah, since in fact the Torah portion was written to you to tell you to keep the Torah and to warn you of the punishments that if you don't. So I think I have some more slides that are a couple of them that were hidden issues that got hidden, I guess. Okay, so different versions of this. I think 29:1 might be a different verse. I can't remember if this verification was here or not, but I think this is either 29:1 or 28:69, depending on your translation. The second Mosaic covenant. These are the words of the covenant which Yahweh commanded Moshe to make with the children of Israel in the land of Moab, besides the covenant which he made with them in Horeb. And continue reading. But Yahweh has not given you a heart to know, and eyes to see, and ears to hear till this day. So this is the second Mosaic covenant, or second covenant. Continue reading verse 6, or it could be a different verse depending on your translation. You ate no bread and drank no wine nor strong drink, so that you might know that I am Yahweh your Elohim. Therefore you shall guard the words of this covenant and do them, so that you prosper in all that you do. That was a test question, I think, for the youth. Well, what this kind of tells us is that Israel in the desert didn't have any alcohol. They were basically on a 40-year fast of alcohol, and even bread, it says here, lechem, because they had not entered into their rest. They were still eating the matzah of the wilderness. No, not the matzah, is it? What's it called? Manna, right? Manna, what is it? Next week, we'll get to this section that kind of talks about it in more detail. But it says, and Yahweh your Elohim shall bring you to the land which your fathers possessed, and you shall possess it, and he shall do good to you, and increase you more than your fathers. And Yahweh your Elohim shall circumcise your heart, and the heart of your seed, your children, your descendants, to love Yahweh your Elohim with all your heart, with all your being, so that you might live. So what is it not like? It's not like the covenant at Horeb. We see that in the New Covenant passages in Jeremiah 31. See, the days are coming, declares Yahweh, when I shall make you a new covenant with the house of Israel and with the house of Yehudah. Not like the covenant I made with their fathers in the day which I took them by the hand to bring them out of the land of Mitzrayim, my covenant which they broke, though I was a husband to them. Baal-ti is that word. Its root word is Baal, showing that Baal is a very kosher Hebrew word that means husband that's been usurped by Baal, the demonic deity. For this is a covenant I shall make with the house of Israel after those days, declares Yahweh. I shall put my Torah in their inward parts and write it on their hearts. I shall be their Elohim, and they shall be my people. And no longer shall they teach each one his neighbor and each one his brother, saying, Know Yahweh, for they shall all know me, from the least of them to the greatest of them, declares Yahweh. For I shall forgive their crookedness and remember their sin no more. So what's this saying here in this passage, I think, and we'll discuss it in more detail and get to actually the Torah portion on chapter 30, is that what is the new covenant? And when was it given? I think we'll look at the parallels between the covenant in Deuteronomy chapter 30, the new covenant there, not like the one I gave at Horeb, aka Sinai, and the new covenant of Jeremiah 31. And do kind of a thought by thought, if not a line by line comparison of the two. So, what are your questions before we go to the Haftorah? The doctrinal question is there more? Well, her question was, why are there so many commands in the Torah to not do things for the dead? Well, I think that part of it, in many cases, when there's something that seems kind of odd, it may well be because that was an ancient pagan practice that you would encounter when you went into the land, because the tribes that were in the land there would be doing those practices, and you may be seduced to join them in their pagan practices. And even in modern times, there's definitely religions that are very much ancestor worship. And so that kind of probably goes into some of the pagan practices of the land, may well be replicated by pagan practices in the Far East today. Yeah, and Korean as well. Yeah. Now, right. I mean, a yahrzeit candle is not worshiping the dead. We do mourner's Kaddish. It's for the survivors. It's for the families that we're asking comfort for, not for comforting for the dead, which is another commonly misinterpreted kind of thing.
Remembering that, there's something we always say when somebody died and they didn't remember who he was. We want to try to remember them, but remembering them isn't the same thing as worshiping. We can still do this every year. For example, the Ten Commandments. Honor your father and mother. It doesn't say honor them while they're still alive. It says honor your father and mother. So if you happen to have a dead parent, it's okay to say, hey, let's remember everything wrong with you. It's not the same thing as worship.
Remembering is not the same as
okay, I'm going to give food to this dead person.
Yeah, exactly.
I think I'm going to take some barbecue over mom's grave.
Well, think back to the culture that they left, right?
Exactly.
Think the culture of Egypt. What did they bury with the pharaohs, right?
Armies.
And that's the culture they left, the pagan culture of Egypt.
So they knew it. They had to have known it.
They were raised in them.
Mm-hmm.
You know, a lot of things are written apply exact then, but don't apply now because very few of them do it. Like, why would they make an image of a cat and call it the name of oh, they did that.
So we just have a couple of slides on the Haftorah. It's just a straight copy from Chabad's page on it. This week's Haftorah is the sixth of a series of 7 Haftorot of consolation. These 7 Haftorot commence on the Shabbat following Tish B'Av and continue until Rosh Hashanah. In glowing terms, the prophet recounts descriptions of what will unfold during the redemption, beginning with the resurrection of the dead and the ingathering of the exiles. Continuing with the joy and abundance the Jewish people will then experience, as well as the gifts that will be brought to God from all the nations of the world. Finally, the Jewish nation will no longer be despised and derided. There will be no longer be violence nor mourning, and God will shine his everlasting light on his people.
Those Chabad guys are smart.
Yeah. Anyway. Okay, so as we mentioned, we're going to do kind of an overview of, we'll look at both chapters 1 and 2, but really kind of give an overview of 2 Peter, because we didn't cover it all because of the lengthy number of mitzvot last week. So we discussed some of this. We went into 1 Peter, but just kind of some highlights. 1 Peter is in both the Western canon and Peshitta canon. Peshitta is the Aramaic, one of the Aramaic editions of the Ketuvim Netzarim, the Nazarene writings. But 2 Peter is part of the Western 5, not included in the Aramaic Peshitta canon, which the Western 5 are 2 Peter, Jude, 2nd and 3rd John, and Revelation of the Church of the East, or the Assyrian Church of the East. Has some other names, the Persian Church, as well as the Nestorian Church. But 2 Peter is in the Syrian Orthodox canon, which includes the Western 5, and that's really only happened about the year in the 5th century. I'll talk about that in just a second, I think. So this should have been a slide that went in, but it's a build. The 2 Peter, as well as the Western 5, were added to the Western canon, aka the Syrian Orthodox Church canon, were added in the 5th century of the Common Era. They weren't for the first 4 centuries or so of that establishment. They were not included in there. We'll talk about that in just a second. It was added in the 5th century, and ancient manuscripts show that Revelation is ordered after the Gospel of John in the Syrian Orthodox Church's canon. So they accepted the authorship by John, and so it's included after the Gospel of John, Revelation, not the end of the book, but near the beginning of the New Testament. And so one might ask, why isn't 2 Peter in the Aramaic Peshitta canon of the Church of the East? Well, their tradition is that their 22-book canon, minus the Western 5, was delivered to them directly by the hand of the Talmudim, the apostles, in Aramaic. And the Western 5 were not, and so they were not included. The Syrian Orthodox Church included them as a move to make an alliance with the Church of Rome against the Church of the East after the Council of Ephesus in 431 CE. So there is a split between, based on doctrines, not on language. I mean, the Syrian Orthodox Church and the Church of the East are both Aramaic speaking, but they split. One side decided to ally with, or make an alliance with the Church of Rome against the Syrian or the Nestorian Church, aka the Church of the East. And so that was when the divide happened. And that's when they added, or that century, they added those Western five back in to their Aramaic canon. So it might be hard to see on the screen here, but kind of an overview from Andrew Gabriel Roth and the Ruach Hadim. It talks about two cities. Edessa is one of them. Edessa is where basically the headquarters of the Syrian Orthodox Church. Might be a little bit small for me to read on the screen here, but the basic gist of this is that Edessa became a safe haven for Nazarenes because the king of Edessa was healed by Thomas. Again, doing one of those things that would make him, an outcast according to the Mishnah. He healed by prayer over the king of Edessa, and as such became a safe haven for believers based on the king being a convert to the Nazarene faith. The other city is hold on. Abdiabne. It's a different. You see it spelled a couple different ways. At least I have, I think. And that is where the Church of the East is located. And they were at one time they were closely allied with each other until they basically broke apart. What this basically says is that Peter, writing in Babylon, delivered his first letter to them directly, which is not too far away from where, as I'll show a map here in just a moment. But that was how those early editions were delivered to the Eastern believers, and that's, as it says, giving them the Eastern canon as we know it today. In other words, a 22-book canon. Now, again, those are the two cities there. This is a kind of a question, or it's a discussion again from Andrew Gabriel Roth, but it's discussing in the first and second century the disputed the dispute between the disputed books rather were listed as among disputed books. But this asked basically the question of why didn't they accept it? And this basically says they didn't accept it because we don't have the originals. You can't give us the originals to prove that it's this case. It doesn't have the colophon, the bookmarks. The scribal mark said when it was done, where it was done, and who did the transmission of it. And so because they couldn't do that, they would not accept it as being scriptural, although they didn't discount it from being real. They just couldn't validate that it was, in fact, by the author that it said it was from. So here's kind of a map of some of the areas. SOC is Syrian Orthodox Church. COE is Church of the East, and Babylon, of course, where Peter was. The Parthian, aka Persian Empire. And you see that Abdiabne is further to the east, and Edessa further to the west. Edessa was under Roman domination. Edessa was, whereas Abdiabne was under the Parthian rule, not under the Roman rule.
And the Armenians were way up north.
The Armenians were way up north. You see it on the map there. It's in the north of this area. The Armenians are there, but not really part of Jacob's story, as far as I know. They're not Armenians. Or they're not Armenians, yeah. Okay. So even in the West, in the Greek text, Origen and Eusebius both listed 2 Peter among the disputed books, which included most of the other ones we've talked about already. And you look at it from a Greek textual perspective, not an Aramaic perspective, the Greek of 2 Peter has a different style and vocabulary than 1 Peter. But we noticed, you notice when we read 1 Peter that Silvanus or Silas may have been the secretary for 1 Peter. We see that that it was sent through Silas or Silvanus. And so 2 Peter may either have had a different secretary or a different translator, or reflect the less polished Greek of a Jewish fisherman. For him, it was Boko Haram. Education was forbidden.
What's the Aramaic word for unveiled?
For what?
But no.
Let's see. So, when was it written? It was thought to be written in Rome some 20 odd years or so after 1 Peter was written. It was said to be under the reign of Nero, and he died in 68. So it figures that Peter was executed sometime in 67 or so. According to early tradition, the Apostle Peter was martyred in Rome at the hands of Nero, according to 1 Clement as well as Eusebius. Again, this is quoting from John McKee, who in the Apostolic Scriptures Messianic edition. The theology of 2 Peter may be easily divided between 3 chapters. The threefold purpose of the epistle is encouraging believers in their spiritual growth, chapter 1. Chapter 2, we read today, to combat false teachers and their teachings, and encourage people to be on guard in relation to Yeshua's return, chapter 3. The text almost or certainly reflects on Peter's impending death. In terms of day-to-day living, the epistle of 2 Peter does not present any challenges for Torah-observant Messianics, but 2 Peter does include many warnings that our Messianic faith community must especially heed. The background of 2 Peter largely confronts the false teachers as deserving of nothing less than eternal punishment. And continuing, 2 Peter includes a strong warning for those living in the last days. It reflects the reality that people will fall away from the faith. As we steadily approach the return of Yeshua, Messianic approaches towards 2 Peter must keep this in mind as we try to police ourselves of any false theologies, perhaps including errant end-time predictions that may enter into the camp.
That's pretty profound right there.
That's kind of what we were talking about earlier.
Yeah. Because even if people are coming over to Messianic Judaism, 15 times more of that, I'm just making that up, but a whole bunch more than that are completely leaving faith altogether. Don't want to hear it. Don't want to have anything to do with it.
Mm-hmm.
So we're
Bouncing out.
Onesies or twosies over here seeking some truth, while 10 or 15 others are going, man, whatever. Don't want to hear it.
So how do we adhere to what Peter was warning? How do we heed Peter's warning? I think there's I'm sorry? To test everything, see how it lines up. Be a Berean, from what Acts 17 says, is to compare what is being said with what the Torah says and verify the words against what not just Torah, but the Tanakh says. So you have to use the whole Tanakh there to prove the case, because some things are fleshed out in the Tanakh that are not quite as evident in the Torah itself, as well as in the Ketuvim Netzarim. So it seems that Messianics are at least as prone as others in making bad theology as well as bad end-time predictions, or predictions that don't come to pass. So if there's no more discussion on that, I want to just take a quick look at something that is good, I think. And the good thing is the calendar. It's hard to see it at behind perhaps, but what the calendar shows, this is the Chabad calendar, or from the Hillel II calendar, from the fixed calendar from Chabad.org. It's talking about a date coming up called Yom Teruah or Rosh Hashanah. And what it shows is on the 18th of September in the common calendar, it's listed as Erev Yom Teruah or Erev Rosh Hashanah. What that means is that the next day is the first of the 7th month, or first of Tishrei, aka Rosh Hashanah or Yom Teruah. That's on the fixed calendar. Erev Rosh Hashanah is on the 18th. So it's always a good thing, in my view, when the next thing happens is that, in fact, this is a a copy paste from a website called torcalendar.com, which shows the new moon in Jerusalem showing up on the evening of the 18th of September. So what that means, of course, is that in 2020, the fixed calendar, sighted moon calendar, equals the new moon sighting calendar for the same day. Except, of course, for some groups that declare Lviv early and they're celebrating Sukkot, in a couple days. The main body, I think, is celebrating Sukkot at the same time across both those who adhere to the fixed calendar as well as those who are adjusting their observance according to the sighted moon. So, in my view, that was a great thing. And the dachshund wants to know if there's more. No? What are your questions or concerns, comments about what we've talked about thus far? Yes. I can't hear you, sorry? The dog's asking a question. That's our puppy's daddy. Spatzy Roo von Schatzi. All right, if you please stand for the Aharonic blessing.
May the Lord bless you and keep you. May the Lord make his face shine upon you and be gracious to you. May the Lord lift up his countenance upon you and give you shalom. Oh, that you would render heavens and come.
Shavua Tov, everybody.
Oh, that you would render heavens and come down. Oh, that you would render heavens and come down. Let the mountains shake, let the earth